Well, better late than never, guys. Russell Westbrook last night in a win against the Portland Trailblazers. I think OKC came into the game winners of their last 10 of 11 games, I think. I think the only loss was a road game against the Boston Celtics. And they beat Portland by a final score of 120 to 111. And that improved their overall record to, I believe, 37 and 19. Yeah, 37 and 19. And they really are rolling right now. And they're on pace to win 54 games. Okay. And Paul George is playing on an entirely different level than he's ever played in his career. Uh, After last night's game, he's averaging 28.7 points per game, about 8 rebounds a game, about 4 assists per game, and I think 2.3 steals per game. But it's not just the numbers. Various players on the Portland Trailblazers team last night stated that they believe that Paul George is playing on an entirely different level than some of the other MVP candidates out there. Giannis Antetokounmpo and James Harden. And not only is Paul George an MVP candidate, but he's also perhaps a leading candidate for Defensive Player of the Year. And much of this is due to the fact that Russell Westbrook has willingly taken a back seat offensively and is letting Paul George flourish as a player. And this has worked brilliantly for the club. Now, in last night's game, not only did Paul George have a triple-double himself, he had 47 points. Matter of fact, let me look up the exact numbers. Paul George had 47 points, 12 rebounds, 10 assists. That last assist coming on a Russell Westbrook three-pointer, of all things. And Russell Westbrook had a triple-double, 21 points, 14 rebounds, 11 assists. Now, it's interesting that earlier this year, there was a game where LeBron James and Lonzo Ball both had a triple-double in the same game. The media made a lot of it. A lot of it. Now, while something was made of it to an extent that these two did it, but it wasn't on the same level. You know what I mean? But I want to focus on Russell Westbrook. Of course, Russell Westbrook broke the long-standing NBA record for consecutive triple-doubles, which was 9 by Wilt Chamberlain. He did it in the 1967-68 season. A couple of times in Russell Westbrook's career. I think he did it twice in that amazing 2016-17 season Russell had. He had 2 separate streaks of 7 consecutive triple-doubles. But this year, he's now done it currently in 10 consecutive games. And he now has 23 triple-doubles on the season and 127 in his career. Only 11 behind Magic Johnson for second all time. But I have to say something, man. The luster of the triple-double is not what it once was. When I was growing up watching basketball in the early 1990s, one of the greatest players in the history of NBA, he was universally seen as a top 10 player. Some people even had him in their top 5, was Oscar Robertson. And I remember people saying that Oscar Robertson was the Mr. Triple Double. And the main thing we thought about Oscar Robertson, yes, we thought about probably the most dominant guard of his era. Okay. Some people make the argument that Jerry West was a little bit better overall in some areas, but most people rank Oscar Robertson ahead of Jerry West, as great as Jerry West was. Matter of fact, I wouldn't even say Jerry West is better overall. I think Jerry West was a better scorer. He was a better shooter. He was more competitive in some areas. And he was a better defensive player. But Oscar was bigger, stronger, more physically dominant, more well-rounded, and could do just about everything. And he was known as Mr. Triple Double, 181 career triple doubles. It's quite possible if they counted steals back then, he might have had a couple of more triple doubles. I'm pretty sure maybe Oscar had a couple of games with 10 steals, especially with the frenetic pace they played in the early to mid 1960s. But still, 181 official triple doubles. And of course, for decades, he was the only man to achieve a triple double in one season, 1961-62 season. And I believe for the first 5 years of his career, he averaged a triple double. So that shows you how physically dominant this guy was, okay? Oscar Robertson. And you also have to take into account that when Oscar Robertson played, the league was a lot more stringent and strict on what an assist was. You could not make any type of offensive move from the time the player passed you the ball to until when you scored. It had to lead directly to a basket. So if, for instance, if Oscar Robertson was playing under today's rules back in the 1960s, a lot of those years where he averaged 9.5 assists or 9.8 assists or whatever it was, would probably be more like 12 assists, maybe even 13 assists. Okay. But the point I want to make is this: triple doubles at one point in time were exceedingly rare, and a triple double was a recognition. It was a achievement that recognized the all-around performance that a player had in a particular ball game. Russell Westbrook, no matter what you can say about today's rules, yes, players today aren't playing the defense they played just even 10, 15 years ago. Defensive players are handicapped. There are some players like Jabari Parker that have openly stated they don't get paid millions of dollars to play defense. So that shows you the importance now defense plays. The rules are catered toward offense. So, yes, the rules help a guy like Russell Westbrook to an extent, to a large extent. But I don't like to go to the point where I'm making it sound like these guys are bums. You know what I'm saying? Yes. In the 1990s, Russell probably wouldn't have had nearly as many triple doubles. But I still think that he would be a good all-around player. I think he still would have his fair share of triple-doubles. And while we can play this game of, and I do it, I'm guilty of it myself. But we can play this game of, well, he was in this era and that era. What we definitely can say is that Russell Westbrook is doing something in his era that no other player is coming close to doing. The closest we see is LeBron James. And there are series of 4, 5, 6 games or so, maybe 7 games, where LeBron James can average a triple-double. But he doesn't come close to doing it over the course of an 82-game schedule, which is much more difficult to do. And not only has Russell done it for a season, he did it last season, albeit it took the last 2 games for him to go on a rebounding tear to achieve it. But this year, he's doing it with ease. It's not even really close. But is it because of the fact that Russell's doing it so easily that we make the snap judgment that, well, since he's doing it so effortlessly, therefore it means that it's not really a hard thing to do anymore? I think it's yes and no. A lot of it is the way the game is played, the way the game is sped up. Rebounding is, I think, the highest it's been in over 20-something seasons. Like average team rebounding, it's way up. The pace is way up. It's the highest it's been since the 80s. Scoring is up. It's the highest it's been since like the late 80s. Okay, what we're seeing is like, scoring wise, at least, it's like the 1980s. But let's be fair to Russell Westbrook here, though. No other player in the history of the league has done this as many times as Russell Westbrook. Let's be fair to the guy. What he's still doing, despite what people can say about the rules, despite the fact, and I'll admit that Russell is not the best player in the NBA, but what he's achieving is historic. And it has to be taken as such. And 7 Sports TV said something. I think he said it, or it might have been in his comment section of his video about Russell Westbrook yesterday. I don't think Russell Westbrook will be fully appreciated until after he retires. I remember Brett Favre, man. Brett Favre was a kind of polarizing. He was popular, but he was somewhat polarizing in sports. Many people didn't appreciate the way that he played. Some people thought he was reckless. Some people didn't quite like the gung-ho style way that he played football, when he played the quarterback position. But since he's retired, he hasn't played football in nearly a decade. Many people now can appreciate a guy like a guy like Brett Favre. You know what I'm saying? Kobe Bryant. I appreciate him more so now since he's retired. And I have to admit that a part of me wished that I didn't have such animus toward him when I got caught up in that Kobe versus Mike shit. And maybe I should have just enjoyed watching the guy play rather than getting caught up in, trying to win an argument about whether or not he's better than this guy or that guy. And maybe we should do that with Russell Westbrook. Instead of constantly trying to critique his game or look for flaws and weaknesses, maybe we should just appreciate what he's doing. We should appreciate the history that he's achieving, rather than always trying to look for uh, reasons to downgrade or to denigrate what he's doing out there on the court. Will he ever win a championship? I don't know what's in the cards for Russell Westbrook. There's been a lot of great players in the history of the NBA who haven't won championships. Charles Barkley, Karl Malone, John Stockton, Reggie Miller come to mind. Alex English, Adrian Dantley, Dominique Wilkins. So the list goes on and on as far as great players who were unable to win a championship. So that's all I gotta say about that, man. Tell me what you guys think.